Bristol Motor Speedway became the setting for one of the most dominant single-car performances of the entire 2026 NASCAR Cup Series season, yet the driver responsible for that dominance climbed out of his car without a trophy. Kyle Larson, piloting the number 5 Hendrick Motorsports Chevrolet, led 284 laps across 505 total, swept both opening stages, and controlled enormous stretches of the race with the kind of authority that usually ends in victory lane. Instead, when the checkered flag flew, it was Ty Gibbs celebrating his first career NASCAR Cup Series win, and Larson was left discussing mistakes, miscommunications, and a race that unraveled in ways nobody could have fully predicted. This is not a story about a driver who had a bad day. This is a story about a driver who had one of the best days of the entire season and still went home empty-handed. And the way Larson spoke afterward made it absolutely clear he understood exactly how much that stung. Larson arrived at Bristol still winless through the first 7 races of 2026, but he was nowhere near crisis territory. He sat 6th in the championship standings with strong underlying speed in nearly every race, and Bristol had historically been one of his finest tracks on the entire circuit. Before the race, he spoke like a driver who already had the puzzle solved, discussing his feel for the pace, the importance of traffic navigation, and how the racing groove shifts constantly throughout a long Bristol afternoon. He did not sound like someone chasing something. He sounded like someone who already understood what winning there required. Ryan Blaney entered the weekend carrying serious momentum of his own. He claimed the pole position after posting the fastest car in practice across every meaningful lap average, and the number 12 team Penske Ford was universally considered the benchmark before a single green flag lap had been completed. These were the 2 drivers the entire field expected to control the race, and for the overwhelming majority of the afternoon, that expectation proved completely accurate. When the green flag dropped, Larson validated every bit of pre-race confidence almost immediately. Starting from 8th position, he was not gifted the lead. He had to earn it through traffic on one of the most difficult tracks in the series for passing, and he accomplished it in just 44 laps, charging all the way to the front and getting past Blaney before the race was even a quarter finished. From that point forward, the number 5 Chevrolet simply took over. Larson won Stage 1 over Christopher Bell, Blaney, and Chase Briscoe. In Stage 2, a 125-lap stretch through the heart of the race, he led all but a single lap. He swept both stages at Bristol for the 3rd time in his career and became the 9th driver in NASCAR history to surpass the 2,000 laps led barrier at a track known as the world's fastest half-mile. That is not just a solid afternoon of racing. That is historic race control by any reasonable measure. A significant reason Larson's dominance looked so clean during those first 2 stages came from what was happening on the other side of pit road. Blaney may have had the fastest car on the track, but his number 12 pit crew kept erasing the advantage every single time the cars came down pit road. The crew ranked 32nd fastest among 37 teams on track that Sunday, and entering Bristol, they had already surrendered 85 positions on pit road across just 7 races, a number that was 30 spots worse than the next closest competitor on the circuit. Larson acknowledged this directly after the race, noting that the pit crew struggles kept putting Blaney behind all day and allowed the number 5 team to settle in, lead laps, and hold on to stage wins. He also made clear that he understood the equation would eventually shift, and that whenever Blaney got clean restarts and better pit stops, holding him off would become extremely difficult. That shift was already coming, and Larson knew it. But before Blaney's pit road troubles even fully resolved, Larson had already created a separate problem entirely on his own. During Stage 2, he misheard a radio call from his spotter. The spotter told him there were 50 laps remaining in the stage. Larson heard 15. The result was that he pushed the car significantly harder, far earlier than the strategy required, burning through more tire life than planned, and expending energy on a run that should have been carefully managed. He still recovered to win the stage, which speaks to just how fast that Chevrolet was, but the true cost of that mistake did not reveal itself immediately. It compounded slowly, showing up later in tire wear, in the rhythm of the car, and in his ability to sustain pace over long green flag runs when it mattered most. While Larson and Blaney were combining to lead 474 of 505 laps, a 3rd driver was quietly working his way into a position that nobody in the broader conversation had fully accounted for. Ty Gibbs, driving the number 54 Joe Gibbs Racing Toyota, started 5th but was shuffled back to 14th in the early laps and spent much of the first 2 stages simply fighting to remain relevant. But lap by lap and run by run, the number 54 kept advancing, stringing together consistent finishes and ending stage 2 in 7th place. The Gibbs story carries weight that extends far beyond racing results. He is the grandson of NASCAR Hall of Fame team owner and former Super Bowl winning coach Joe Gibbs, and the son of the late Coy Gibbs, who passed away in his sleep on November 6, 2022, just hours after Ty won the championship in NASCAR's second highest division. Ty entered Bristol having made 130 Cup Series starts without a single victory, carrying the full weight of that legacy and that personal loss into every race weekend. But in the 5 races leading into Bristol, he had finished inside the top 6 each time, and his crew chief Tyler Allen had already developed a strategic philosophy that would prove absolutely decisive before the afternoon concluded. With 22 laps remaining, Chase Elliott spun to bring out the 8th caution of the afternoon, and the field suddenly faced a critical decision at the worst possible moment. The 3 main contenders went in 3 completely different directions. Gibbs stayed out, holding track position on old tires and inheriting the race lead. Larson came down pit road and took 2 fresh tires, restarting 6th. Blaney took 4 fresh tires and restarted 7th. When the green flag flew again, the race became a direct battle between track position and tire advantage. Gibbs was out front running on rubber that was nearly 100 laps old. Blaney and Larson had fresh tires and the raw speed to close ground quickly. Larson raced forward to 3rd almost immediately, and Blaney charged hard as well, but Gibbs held the line with remarkable composure. His radio call during the caution had been direct and certain, telling crew chief Allen that he did not want to give up track position under any circumstances, and Allen honored that call completely. That decision set up everything that followed. Just when it appeared Gibbs might manage the gap to the finish, the race took one final violent turn. With 4 laps remaining, Kyle Busch spun Riley Herbst in what appeared to be deliberate retaliation for an earlier incident, sending the race into overtime. It was the first overtime period at Bristol in 11 years. The field reset with Gibbs out front on old tires and Blaney and Larson directly behind him carrying rubber that was nearly 100 laps fresher. On paper, this should have been a straightforward pass. Bristol, however, does not always follow the script that logic writes. Blaney went side by side with Gibbs through the final lap, sliding and drag racing to the checkered flag in a moment that had the entire grandstand on its feet. At the line, Gibbs crossed first by just 0.055 seconds, the closest finish at Bristol since Rusty Wallace beat Ernie Irvan by 1 foot back in April of 1990. Larson finished 0.229 seconds behind in 3rd place. Gibbs became the 6th driver in NASCAR history to earn his first Cup Series win at Bristol, joining Dale Earnhardt in 1979, Rusty Wallace in 1986, Ernie Irvan in 1990, Elliott Sadler in 2001, and Kurt Busch in 2002. Victory Lane at Bristol was immediately filled with something far heavier than a standard trophy presentation. Gibbs climbed from the number 54 Toyota and was surrounded by his mother Heather, his grandfather Joe, and his cousin Jackson, who serves as a tire changer on the number 50 car. The celebration carried an emotional weight that went well beyond anything recorded on the timing sheets. Gibbs spoke about wanting his father to have witnessed the moment, and Joe Gibbs spoke about his late son Coy during the celebration, saying he had raised Ty throughout his entire life and was certainly watching from somewhere. Heather Gibbs captured the bittersweet reality of the entire moment when she said she wished Coy were there to celebrate with his son, but that he had prepared Ty for every single moment like this one. Ryan Blaney, finishing just 0.055 seconds behind after leading significant laps himself, still found time to offer genuine and meaningful praise for Gibbs, recalling his own first win and the elation that came with it, and acknowledging that Gibbs had dealt with considerable outside criticism throughout his career, and had handled it with composure before finally proving himself on the racetrack in the most direct way possible. After the race, Larson did not deflect responsibility or point fingers without accountability. He laid out exactly how Bristol slipped away from him piece by piece in a post-race breakdown that stood among the most honest driver assessments of the entire 2026 season. He acknowledged that Blaney had by far the best car all day, and that the pit crew struggles were the only reason the number 12 spent so much of the race working from behind. He was equally direct about the final run, describing it as his worst stretch of the entire afternoon, noting that the team was making adjustments and that Gibbs had simply gotten stronger while he lost his footing on the racetrack. On the strategic chaos at the end, he summarized the entire situation in a single sentence that captured the full complexity of what had unfolded, saying it got completely crazy with the strategy, but that finishing third was still something he could accept. That is not the voice of a satisfied driver. That is the voice of a driver who fully understands the race spiraled away from anything clean or predictable, and who knows exactly what was lost in the process. The winless streak now sits at 32 consecutive races dating back to May 11, 2025 at Kansas Speedway, and that number makes every near-miss land harder than it otherwise would. Larson carries 5 top 10 finishes across 8 races and sits 6th in the standings, and the speed has been present in virtually every race this season. But a 32-race drought for a defending Cup Series champion demands a real explanation, and Bristol, where he led 284 laps and still finished third, only deepens the question rather than answering it. The broader standings picture also shifted meaningfully at Bristol. Tyler Reddick continues to lead the championship, but his points advantage over Blaney shrunk to 62 points after the race. Blaney's pit crew situation has now become one of the defining storylines of the 2026 season, with the number 12 losing 11 positions on pit road at Bristol alone and having surrendered 85 spots across the first 7 races combined. Blaney addressed it bluntly after the race, stating plainly that it needed to get better if the team intended to keep competing for race wins. Gibbs, meanwhile, carries a 6-race top 10 streak into the next event after finally converting sustained momentum into the victory his performances had been building toward. The NASCAR Cup Series now heads to Kansas Speedway for the Advent Health 400 on April 19th, and the storyline surrounding that race almost writes itself without any embellishment needed. Kansas is the exact site of Kyle Larson's last Cup Series victory, which came on May 11th of 2025. Every race since that day has added another entry to a drought that now stands at 32 consecutive starts, and arriving at the place where that drought began after dominating Bristol and leaving without anything to show for it carries a specific kind of weight that is difficult to fully articulate. Hendrick Motorsports has won 3 of the last 4 races at Kansas, and both Larson and Chase Elliott won there during the 2025 season. The track sets up well for the number 5 Chevrolet on paper, and the speed has been present all season long. But as Bristol demonstrated with absolute clarity, speed alone does not close races. The best car at Bristol did not win. The most laps led at Bristol did not win. What won was patience, strategic nerve, the right caution at the right moment, and the composure to hold off 2 former Cup Series champions on old tires with everything on the line. Bristol rewarded the driver who made the right call in the final moments. Kansas will demand exactly the same. And for Kyle Larson, the question heading into that race has nothing to do with pace or raw performance, because those have never genuinely been in doubt. The question is whether everything else can finally align at the right moment, because at Bristol on April 12, 2026, it did not. And 32 races of waiting is already a long time for a defending champion to keep searching for an answer that feels like it should have arrived by now.